Yes, here we are. Good morning. Guys, you're doing much better. Last week we didn't have anybody over here. Now we got 7 people. People at home can't see that. So we'll say it's another full house. It is about that time. And so we've got one elder. Oh, there's another elder. Because we've got elders in here, I put this slide in coming up that, one of the good things that this congregation does is we give Bibles to the seniors when they graduate. And so I noticed this online, and I thought maybe we ought to advise the elders that this is something that we could probably get special for the seniors this year. Signed copies. I'm not sure who signed them, and I don't know whether it's first edition or not either. All right. So here we are. We're still in the book of Hebrews, and I appreciate your patience and your attendance. And I know that some of you are here because you want to absorb what's being taught. Others are here because they don't want to lose their seat for worship. But whatever reason you're here, and especially the people that have tuned in online, I appreciate it. So let's jump right in. In fact, my first slide here kind of starts at a place I don't want to start at, because it starts at verse 19, and really we need to start a little bit before that as we end chapter 6, because we're about ready to jump into what we've promised before, talking about Melchizedek. And it's an interesting study. It's one of those things that kind of gets skipped over by a lot of people, and for a lot of good reasons. But it is interesting, and you'll hear or read, if you read some commentaries, all kinds of information about this. But we're going to stick to what's in the Bible, and we'll go from there. So really, this slide shows us from verse 19, but really we need to start a little bit earlier than that, in verse 17 of the end of chapter 6, because this builds up to that. And so bear with me as we read, starting with verse 17. So when God desired to show more convincingly to the heirs of the promise the unchangeable character of his purpose, he guaranteed it with an oath, so that by 2 unchangeable things in which it is impossible for God to lie, we who have fled for refuge might have strong encouragement to hold fast to the hope set before us. We have this as a sure and steadfast anchor of the soul, to hope, a hope that enters into the inner place behind the curtain, where Jesus has gone as a forerunner on our behalf, having become a high priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. So that's how at least most people have ended chapter 6. As we've said time and time again, the chapter and verses were added much later than the original text. So it continued on to chapter 7, and, well, really we need to talk a little bit about what happens where we hear of Melchizedek, because there's a lot like I said, that you'll read in commentaries that isn't in the scriptures. So let's find out what exactly is in the scriptures. In fact, if you look to the very beginning in Genesis 14, 1 through 24 tells the story where we first are introduced to Melchizedek. And we could go through that, and by the way, if you really want to test your pronunciation skills, read the first few verses of chapter 14 in Genesis. I will not. But let me give you the thumbnail sketch of what's going on in this particular part of Genesis. It's really the first war that we read about in Genesis, or in the Bible. It's not necessarily the first war that there was, but maybe it's the first one that we read about. And basically, in the Dead Sea area, one of the kings, while he was away trying to win the world, a king named Chedorlaomer. While he was away, some of the other kings of the city-states around decided that they wanted everything that somebody else had, so they created a battle. And when they went into battle, they captured all these cities and carried off people and treasures. And one of the things that they carried off was Lot and his family and his belongings. Well, Lot was the nephew of Abram. And Abram said, that's enough of that. And he put together his army. And to tell you, kind of give you some idea of how well off Abram was, the Bible says that he put together his fighting force from his household. And his fighting force amounted to 318 men. That's a big household. So he put together his army. He went after these three kings that had done battle, and he defeated them. He regained all that was taken, including his nephew Lot, and brought them back. And so that's, in a nutshell, what happened that leads up to this. But basically, this was all done in, the north, around Damascus. And they came back to here. And this is where we read most of it in Genesis 14, 17 through 24. And so that's where we're going to pick up. And this is the battle, or this is after the battle that brought Lot back safely and all the goods that were taken. And starting in verse 17, we're going to read exactly what happened at this point, and this is where Melchizedek came into the picture. And it starts out after his return from the defeat of Chelamether and the kings who were with him. The king of Sodom went out to meet him. Who him? Well, if we read the verses before that, it would indicate that it's Abram. Went out to meet him in the valley of Sava and brought out bread. I skipped ahead. That is the king's valley. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High. And he blessed him, Abram, and said, "Blessed be Abram by God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth. And blessed be the God Most High, who has delivered our enemies or your enemies unto your hand. And Abram gave who? Don't get lost in the hymns. Gave Melchizedek a tenth of everything. Now the story will go on, and it kind of shows you the integrity of Abram, or Abraham as he becomes, because they offered him all the treasures, all the spoils of the war, and he refused it. He said, no, that's not for him. He went with one purpose, and that was to get Lot back and Lot's belongings back. And it shows the integrity of Abram. But this is the introduction of the high priest Melchizedek. One more time it's mentioned in the Old Testament, and that's in Psalms 110, verse 4. The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. So here we are. That's all there is about Melchizedek in the Old Testament. Now, like I say, in commentaries, you're going to read all kinds of things about this as a apparition, that Melchizedek is a apparition of Jesus, of all these things that are brought out. But like I said, we'll stick to what it's in the Bible. So nothing more in the Old Testament about Melchizedek. But the reference there is to the fact that he is a level above. Why do we know? Because Abram presented to him the tithes. So by doing that, Abram has lifted Melchizedek a level above him. And we'll see that the priests in the Old Testament thought of Abraham, as a step above them. So let's go on to the famous chapter 7 in the order of Melchizedek. And the writer starts out first thing and lets us know what he knows about Melchizedek. For this Melchizedek, king of Salem. Now, there's some reference to where Salem is. Salem isn't on any map, but there is some, what do we call, prognostication that Salem is really Jerusalem, or possible that area. Anyway, it goes on to, yes.
The significance is that Salem is Hebrew for peace, and Melchizedek is actually, when it says King of Salem, it's translating Melchizedek. Melchizedek also means King of Peace,
Which we will see in the scriptures. It says, for this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, met Abraham, returning from the slaughter of the kings, and blessed him. And to him Abraham apportioned a tenth part of everything. He is first, by translation of his name, King of Righteousness, and then he is also King of Salem, that is King of Peace. So here the writer is defining or giving the definition of what the words mean, both Salem and Melchizedek. He is without father or mother or genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life. But resembling the Son of God, he continues a priest forever. Now, what's the significance to Jewish individuals about the fact that he has no genealogy? For the Jews, genealogy is everything. I mean, read Numbers, Chronicles, Leviticus. Genealogy is your station in life as far as the Jews are concerned. And so the writer here is saying this individual, this priest most high, has no mother, has no father, has no beginning, has no end. Puts him in a position that no one else is in. Goes on in verse 4, see how great this man was, to whom Abraham, the patriarch, gave a tenth of the spoils. And those descendants of Levi who received the priestly office have a commandment in the law to take tithes from the people, that is, from their brothers, though those also are descendants from Abraham. But this man who does not have his descendant from them received tithes from Abraham and blessed him who had the promise. In fact, if you go to Leviticus 21 or 25, you'll see the rules and regulations for the priests. They were many and definite. So the writer is telling us this individual, this Melchizedek, who has no father, has no mother, has no descendants, has no genealogy, is above Abraham. And the Levites look to Abraham for the law, for their authority. Going on in verse 7, it is beyond dispute that inferior is blessed by superior. What reference is that to? What reference is blessed? It is beyond dispute that inferior is blessed by superior. How about the reference to the fact that Melchizedek blessed Abraham? It is beyond dispute that inferior is blessed by superior. In the one case, tithes are received by mortal men, but in the other case, by one of whom it is testified that he lives. One might even say that Levi himself, who receives tithes, pays tithes through Abraham, for he was still in the loins of his ancestor when Melchizedek met him. Met who? Abraham. So the writer's telling us, even before Levi was even thought of, Melchizedek was blessing Abraham. Basically, the writer is trying to put into place the order, for lack of a better term, the pecking order that we need to look at in regards to this, because we're going to get to the point where the author tells us that Jesus is superior or in line 2 of Melchizedek. Verse 11. Now, if perfection had been attributed through the Levitical priesthood, for under it the people received the law, what further need would there have been for another priest to raise after the order of Melchizedek, rather than one named after the order of Aaron? For when there is a change in the priesthood, there is necessarily a change in the law as well. For the one of whom these things are spoken belonged to another tribe, from which no one has ever served at the altar. What are they talking about here? How did you become a priest? Pardon? You are from the tribe of Levi. And where did that come from? Came from Abraham.
And not just from the tribe of Levi, to be a priest, you had to be from Aaron.
Right.
Within the tribe of Levi.
Right. You had to follow that genealogy. And now we're talking about one that's better than that, the high priest, that doesn't come from that lineage, that doesn't come from that genealogy. In verse 20, and it is, or it was, not without an oath. For those who formerly became priests were made such without an oath, but this one was made a priest with an oath by the one who said to him, "The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever." This makes Jesus the guarantor of a better covenant. So all of this brings down to the point, who made the priest in the Old Testament? Well, it was by the law. It was boom, boom, boom. This is how you became a priest. You just didn't slide into it. You weren't made by popular vote. You weren't because you were rich or you were famous or what. There was an order. And now that order is changed. There is a change in the covenant, and there is a change for the better. Verse 22, this makes Jesus the guarantor of a better covenant. What is a guarantor? Easy. Says
King James says surety.
surety. If I'm a guarantor, I am standing behind it completely, 100%. Co-signer, more than a co-signer. In fact, another word that we need to look at, we've had therefore and let us. Well, another neat word that we need to look at in especially Hebrews, the word better. Because after all, the writer is going through this step by step to show these individuals and us that Jesus is better. In fact, the word better is used, 121 times in the whole Bible, 39 in just the New Testament. Of that 39, 11 times in the book of Hebrews. And a couple things that we need to look at. I'm not a Greek scholar. I'll lean on Neil for that. But new, the words in Hebrew or Greek that were used here, we've said this before, that lots of times there are several words that when we translate into English, we get one word. And new is one of them. Now, we can talk about new and improved. And if I say something is new and improved, basically you're thinking about it was the same thing as before, it's just made better. Or I can give something that is new, which means it's never been that way before, never had it before, it's new. And this is what happens in Greek. The word new, describing something that is new and improved, is N-E-O-S, neos. That's not used here. The word that's used here is kainos, K-A-I-N-O-S. It is describing something that is brand new. It's not a reproduction. It's not an improved version of something before. It's brand new. And that's the word that is used here when it's talking about a new covenant. It's not that the old covenant wasn't good. What made the old covenant not work were the people. The people didn't make it work. So we had to make something new. And so we have something new. The former priests were many in number because they were prevented by death from continuing in office. But he holds his priesthood permanently because he continues forever. Consequently, he is able to save to the uttermost those who draw near to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them. That's what we want. We want to tie our wagon, so to speak, to the individual that has the most authority, to the individual that's permanent, not temporary. The writer told us before that part of the problem with the priesthood that existed before was the fact that they sinned just like anybody else. So though they offered sacrifices for the individual, they also had to offer sacrifices for themselves. Where Jesus was sinless and offered a sacrifice of himself for all. For it is indeed fitting that we should have such a high priest, holy, innocent, unstained, separated from sinners, and exalted above the heavens. He has no need, like those high priests, to offer sacrifices daily, first for his own sins and then for those of the people, since he did not this once for all. For he did this once and for all, their weakness, when he offered up himself. For the law appoints men in their weaknesses a high priest, but the word of the oath, which came later than the law, appoints a son that has been made perfect forever. I love this next part. This next part kind of reminds me of when I was in school, and the teacher would give a long dissertation and come to the point, and usually stood in front of me and pointed their bony finger at me and said, "Now, the point is this: we have such a high priest, one who is seated at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in heaven, a minister in holy places in the true tent that the Lord set up, not man." So this is what the writer's saying, so this is what I've been telling you. This Jesus, this individual, this person that was among you is exactly this high priest that we long for. Now, in days before, for every high priest was appointed to offer gifts and sacrifices. Thus it was necessary for this priest also to have something to offer. Now, if he were on earth, he would not be a priest at all, since there are priests who offer gifts according to the law, The writer's saying there's still priests that offer sacrifices for the Lord. What is the job of a priest? The priest, if you look at it in the broad sense of any kind of religion, the priest is supposed to be a go-between between the human individuals and the God, or gods if you're looking at it in open religions. The priest is the one that makes intercession, makes contact through their special appointment, their ability to approach the God. This is the duty of the priest, to offer sacrifices for the humans to a God. And this was the job of the priest then. And sort of, if we look at it today, there are still individuals, there are still denominations, there are still religions that require an earthly connection to get to God, where the writer is telling us it's not necessary for us because we already have that high priest sitting at the right hand of God, who we have access to. Hebrews 8, the 5th chapter, or the 5th verse. They serve a copy and a shadow of the heavenly things. For when Moses was about to erect the tent, he was instructed by God, saying, "See that you make everything according to the pattern that was shown you on the mountain." If we go back to our Old Testament history, we know that Moses was told exactly what to do. We can read it through all the first few books, what it was supposed to be, how big it was, how they were the written regulations, the law. But as it is, Christ has obtained a ministry that is as much more excellent than the old, as the covenant he meditates is better, since it is enacted on better promises. For if that first covenant had been faultless, there would have been no occasion to look for a second. But why didn't the first one work? Because it was flawed? It says flawless. It was flawless. The problem was it was in our hands. And we didn't do it well. So there had to be another route. Why didn't we do it well? Why didn't the law work as intended when it was in our hands? God gave us choice. And we didn't handle that responsibility very well, did we? Do we? He gave us the ability to make decisions on our own. He gave us all the instructions that we needed to know to live a life that was totally acceptable to Him, but we chose not necessarily to do it that way. And He even gave us opportunities to rectify it, but we didn't handle those well. Remember the individuals that were led out of Egypt and promised that they could go to a land of milk and honey? They didn't handle it well. Yes.
Paul talks about this as well
It could almost be it could almost be indicated by the term we use today as tough love. We were given the opportunity to go it on our own. Here are the rules. Here's the way you need to go. You have choice. And we didn't do well.
We can say, well, that was the Jews, but we wouldn't have done any better.
In fact, the total reason that God chose the Jews was that they were supposed to spread the word, set the example, lay the path for everybody. But they took it on themselves as we're the only ones. We're the chosen ones. Well, he chose them to be the forerunners, not to be the only ones. And then in the New Testament, when the word was finally given to the Gentiles, they thought, oh, we can't do that. We're the chosen ones. We're the only ones. But they aren't. They weren't. In fact, if we look at, behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. Not like the covenant that I made with their fathers on the day when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, my covenant that they broke, though I was their husband, declares the Lord. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after these days, declares the Lord. I will put my law within them, and I will write it on their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. And no longer shall each one teach his neighbor or each his brother, saying, know the Lord, for they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord. For I will forever I will forgive their iniquity, and I will remember their sins no more. Now you can read that in two places, almost word for word. You can read it in Hebrews, and you can read it in Jeremiah. So the writer of Hebrews was telling people that, guess what? This shouldn't come as a surprise to you. This shouldn't be a big deal, this Jesus, because you were told about it before. And you need to remember it. And you need to embrace it. You need to grab onto what has been told to you. Hebrews chapter 8 ends this way. Remember what we were talking about, the word new, brand new, something fresh out of the box. In speaking of a new covenant, he makes the first one obsolete. And what is becoming obsolete and growing old is ready to vanish away. So don't hang on to these things. What was the one thing that the Jews were trying to impose upon the Jewish Christians at this time? Circumcision, for one. The law, bringing back the law. Bring back the old stuff. Bring back the Levitical priest. The writer here is saying it's obsolete. It's vanished away. How significant is that for us today? There are denominations that are saying, come and do it my way. We can eliminate this, or we can add this, or we can change this. We make it better for you. I saw an ad the other day for someone who was looking for a church in Prattville. And it was interesting to read through the comments that people were putting on. One of them said, "Come to our church. We're laid back. We don't condemn anybody. We don't condemn anything. We're friendly. Whatever you want, we can agree with." Neil?
One of the things, this statement that he makes may very well be immediately prophetic. He's just stated that there are priests, and he uses the present tense, who are offering. This being written probably just before 70 AD, says, "What is becoming obsolete is growing old and ready to vanish away." The priesthood in 70 AD, the offering of sacrifices, the whole system was wiped clean by God with the hands of the Roman armies. And it was, Judaism didn't vanish away, but that whole system of worship did.
And in our terminology today, if we apply this book to us, is that this we need to look back on, that it hasn't changed. What did the scriptures say about the priesthood of Melchizedek? Forever. Our high priest, Jesus, is forever. This is it. This new covenant is forever. There's no expiration date. There's no best by date. This is it. This is the best that ever was or ever will be. Next week, we hit chapter 9. Thank you for your attention.